for joining us. I know that it's a busy set of sessions, and we're really appreciative for those of you who are here in the room, despite all of the other exciting things that are going on. And also, we're happy to have those of you who are joining us online for the live stream. So welcome to this session, which is entitled Climate Smarter Budgets for Agricultural Transformation. We're happy to have a fantastic panel of people here together, and I'm looking forward to having an in-depth conversation about the way that we can utilize budgets in a way that minimizes the risks and maximizes the impact for climate-smart agriculture. Let me tell you a little bit about why we're here today and the actors that are present, and then I'm going to introduce my colleague who's going to make a presentation to get us started. So at COP26, the Agricultural Innovation Mission was launched as an initiative co-led by the United States and UAE, which seeks to address climate change and global hunger by uniting participants to increase investment and support for climate-smart agriculture and food systems over the period of 2021 to 2025. And to date, Aim for Climate has collectively increased investment by $13 billion US, a very impressive amount of money. And despite this progress, as we all know, it's clear that in many countries across the globe, there's simply not enough public finance or private finance to meet the massive challenges of climate change. And in Africa, this is sadly still the case. And so this session is bringing us together today to ask the question, how can we get better results with existing budgets in order to work on transformation towards climate-smart agriculture? And this event is a collaboration between Aim for Climate and a program at the Food and Agricultural Organization of the United Nations called Monitoring and Analyzing Food and Agricultural Policies Program, or MAPA. And it's focused on helping governments get better policy results for climate mitigation and adaptation. And as I said, we're here to think about how we can use existing budgets better, how we can leverage our resources, but also how governments can act, the third step of the AGR theme today, to reallocate existing public budgets for food systems transformation. I'm going to pass over to my colleague, Christian Mann, who's International Affairs Advisor at Aim for Climate and co-lead at U.S. Department of Agriculture. Christian, let me pass to you for opening remarks. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. So like Mark said, my name is Christian Mann, and I'm an International Affairs Advisor and a co-lead on the Agriculture Innovation Mission for Climate at USDA. We're so excited to have you with us today for this important event. As many of you know, Aim for Climate is an initiative, as Lauren said, initiated at COP26 by the United States and the UAE, focused on addressing climate change and global hunger by uniting its partners to significantly increase investment in climate-smart ag and food systems innovation over a 5-year period, 2021 to 2025. Today, Aim for Climate has 52 government partners and over 500 partners representing civil society and the private sector. Together, these partners have increased their investments in climate-smart ag and food systems innovation by $13 billion, as you've just heard. This is incredible progress. However, we realize that for many governments, making new investments of this kind is difficult, if not impossible. Governments in low and middle income countries already face impossible decisions about how they allocate their limited budgetary resources, often having to choose between public health, food security, and the environment, and of course, climate change mitigation and adaptation. This predicament raises a basic question we're asking at Aim for Climate. For government partners that can't expand their investments in climate-smart agriculture, how can we help them optimize their existing budgets? It turns out we're not the only ones asking that question. The UN Food and Agriculture Organization's MAFAP initiative has been working on this very issue for over a decade, with the support of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. MAFAP stands for Monitoring and Analyzing Food and Agricultural Policies. This program helps governments on the African continent understand how they can more rapidly accomplish their own priorities for the agriculture sector by optimizing how their fiscal resources are allocated. Today, we're pleased to announce a new partnership between AIM for Climate and FAO. This partnership will bring the expansive analytical capabilities of the MAFAP program to AIM for Climate's government partners across Africa, providing them with new insights into how their public expenditures in the agriculture sector can better align with their policy priorities, including those related to climate mitigation and adaptation. One element of the theory of change guiding this partnership is that when governments better understand how their budgets for agriculture are spent, they'll realize efficiencies that could free up resources for things like innovation and climate-smart agriculture. In essence, this partnership is about meeting governments where they are and giving them tools to build budgets that are truly climate smarter. In a few minutes, you'll have a chance to hear directly from representatives of two African governments, Ghana and Morocco. These AIM for Climate government partners will talk about what they're already doing to address climate change and how this new partnership could help them accelerate those efforts. We're also fortunate to have with us representatives of the Gates Foundation and the Kalimo Trust to help us understand why this partnership has the potential to make real differences in the lives of real people on this amazing continent. Thank you. Lauren, back to you.
Thank you so much, Christian. I'm going to pass the floor now to my colleague, Marco Sanchez. Dr. Sanchez is the Deputy Director of the Agri-Food Economics Division at the FAO, where he co-directs some reports that you're probably all aware of, the flagship reports on the state of food security and nutrition in the world, or the SOFI, as well as the State of Food and Agriculture, the SOFA, and he also oversees the MAFAP program that we're going to be talking about today. Previously, he was the senior economist at the UN Department of Economic and Social Affairs and an economist at the UN Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean. He has numerous publications to his name in top journals and has also lectured at various universities around the world. Marco, without further ado, let me pass the word to you. Thank you.
Hello everyone, good afternoon. Thank you, Lauren and Christian, for the introduction to this special event. I'm very thrilled to be here and share some of the points that may, trigger, motivate the discussion and the learning from the panelists that we have today here. Let me perhaps start with what I would say the problem that I have here. And for this, I just want to show some maps. Okay, good. That may help us understand the problematic. Even though these maps may have limitations, they may have some issues about how territories are defined there, how some non-self-governing territories are not being depicted here because there's no data to represent them. And so on and so forth, with that disclaimer being done, let me just show you where the problem lies. And here in this graph, we start seeing that Africa is the most vulnerable continent to climate change, and this is particularly true where it affects particularly agriculture. I'm using here as an example, because there may be many other examples that we can draw from, the indexes by the Notre Dame Global Adaptation Initiative. And in this particular case, this index that I show here shows that Africa is the continent with the highest food vulnerability due to high exposure and sensitivity to climate change shocks, but also the low adaptive capacity when these shocks strike. Now, in this figure, the darker the figure, the more the vulnerability, and it comes very clearly that Africa shows that food vulnerability to climate change. Now, the problem here is that it's not only about vulnerability, but also about how capable are we to address that vulnerability. So the next slide will show what the Notre Dame also calls the readiness index. And it basically shows where countries are ready to tackle, countries are ready to invest, and so on and so forth. So on top of the vulnerability, what Africa shows is that it's currently the least ready continent to make effective use of investments for adaptation. And this is of course a problem that comes clearly in this graph, where we have the opposite here. The darker means the more ready you are, right? So in the case of Africa, as you can see here, the lighter means that they are less ready to tackle or face the problem of climate change. And this is due to, of course, a relative lack of safe and efficient business environments. We have, problems, economic problems, weaker economies, governance issues, and social development gaps that need to be addressed. Importantly, we have high poverty in the continent. We lack somehow the ICT infrastructure that is needed, and of course the gaps in education and immigration. So on top of this problem then, we have the issue that, okay, countries know this, right, in Africa, and they are trying to move on this. And of course, the vulnerability has led several countries to adopt national adaptation plans, and national internal contributions, and some other commitments, of course. However, what we see is that expenditures to increase adaptive capacity in agriculture are the lowest in Africa compared to the rest of the world. Very quickly on the left-hand side, you can see some numbers that very quickly show that we are not spending enough, particularly in agriculture, which is a sector that is very sensitive to climate shocks. So the key issue here is how do we, because we cannot scale up expenditures all of a sudden. The first question that comes to mind is how can we make use of the current expenditures much better? How can we, as Christian said in the introduction, what are the efficiency gains that we can think of with the current expenditures? And this is where I'm driving towards right now in my presentation. So I will tell you a little bit what FAU is doing here. I'm telling you what FAU is doing here in this regard. We have several entry points to support governments in devising cost-effective public investments in agriculture. There are several entry points in the organization, but it's not FAO alone. We work with a lot of partners to do this. But I'm going to highlight just one activity that we have, which is the MAF program, which has already been mentioned at the beginning. And since 2009, this program is supported by a number of donors, particularly the Vietnamese Gates Foundation. I'm happy that Alan is here with us today. It's the FAO leading policy support initiative that works with countries in Africa to strategically prioritize, reform, and implement policies and investments on food and agriculture. Currently, and over the years, we have covered 15 countries in Africa. We are currently expanding. We're starting in Bangladesh, and soon enough, we will also be doing some work in North Africa. So now, in these countries, what we are doing is the following. Basically, what we are doing is, first of all, tracking and monitoring the policy support that countries give, governments give to the agri-food sector. And this takes place in two forms. One form is what we call the price incentives. You may have heard about import tariffs, export taxes, market price regulations, and so on. And those are the guys who really make the group of price incentives. So we are monitoring those price incentives and working with governments to understand what is going on. Who is being penalized, who is being incentivized in the sector. But we also work with public expenditures. Public expenditures. And that's the other area of work. And both of them are really scrutinized and assessed to work with governments to understand, what are the ways of better use the resources. But we are coupling this work of price incentives, public expenditure tracking and monitoring with economic modeling. And here economic modeling comes in to help us identify what are the policies and investment priorities that are the most effective to accelerate inclusive agricultural transformation. When I say inclusive agricultural transformation, I'm talking about increasing agri-food GDP, I'm talking about reducing rural poverty, I'm talking about creating more jobs off farm in rural areas, and I'm talking about improving nutrition. So this is a number of objectives that are many, and it's difficult to tackle them all simultaneously, so we need to optimize our budgets. Now, last but not least, upon demand, governments come to us and request, can you analyze policy issue? And we try to work with governments to do that with the objective of reforming something on the ground. Of course, there is some capacity development component here, and we work with governments. Having established all this infrastructure is giving us the opportunity to ask questions. What else can a program like MAFA do, right? We have covered all this. How can we improve our support to government? So let me explain two aspects that will take me to the climate issue, which is the important one here in this meeting today. I'm going to talk a little bit about public expenditure, because this is what gets us into the matter that we're discussing today. And MAFA draws upon a very highly disaggregated database and methodology to, spell out all expenditures in agriculture. As you can see on the right-hand side, we work with different agents. So we track not only individual expenditures or expenditures that affect individuals like consumers or producers, but we also work with those expenditures that affect the generally in the sector, like research and development, for example. So we track all those expenditures, and it's very important to understand that we don't track them by categories, but also by subcategories, right? You see the first one there, you see that one category can have several subcategories. So it's a very complex issue that we are trying to tackle here. It's not easy, but we work with governments and we do capacity building to work with them so that we can track. Now, when you track, the way we do, you come up with a lot of surprises, right? You can actually analyze and you come up with conclusions about the level of spending on food and agriculture, the composition of expenditure by type, beneficiary sector, and even governments get surprised about what we find that they are doing, right? And that's very important to mention. Importantly, we track the capacity of the government to execute what it plans in budgets, which is not necessarily the same thing, right? Execution and budgeting is not the same. We track that out, and it helps a lot. The coherence also between spending and government objectives and commitments is tracked here, so tiny detect gaps. Now, to show you how useful it's been, for example, this is an example for Rwanda. And what you see, the public expenditure analysis for Rwanda over the years give us interesting insights that were passed on to the government for decisions and reforms. So, for example, on the top, you can see that we detected the shrinking funds for research and development and extension services for agriculture over the years. We told the government, look, this is what is going on, but we need research and development in agriculture, but you are shrinking expenditures there. The other thing that we detected is funding gaps. We detected funding gaps in some of the programs of a development plan, in this case the strategic plan for agricultural transformation. If you see on the bottom, on the right hand side, there are some programs that have underspending compared to what had been planned. And this evidence was given to the government so that the government took it very seriously and used it to improve the fourth strategic plan for agricultural transformation. Now, we use this public expenditure analysis to do modeling. And here, this takes me to something that I want to explain very simply. Very simply. So, we have some policy optimization modeling tools that we are constructing with data, official data, and working with governments that is showing very interesting results. In this graph, what you have is the public budget allocated to agriculture in Uganda, as an example. And we have projected the budget to 2025. Actually, we have projected it to many more years into the future, but let's stop in 2025. And what you have on the left-hand side that says business as usual is the way the government is spending, right? In different investment areas, fertilizers, extension, and so on and so forth. What we have done to this policy modeling tool is to optimize the budget. And the budget starts changes. If you see on the right-hand side, we have a budget that slowly but surely starts changing. Now it's becoming optimal, and I will show you why it is optimal. Because we are forcing the budget to help us achieve certain things, right? Which is agricultural transformation expressed in several variables that I will show you. But interesting, you see, for example, Uganda should spend more on extension, according to this approach, right? It should spend a little more on rural electrification and reduce a little the expenditure in rural roads, for example. And when we work with governments on this, then we say, okay, but what would we gain if we do this? If we reallocate our budget, we repurpose optimally. And impressively, for several countries, we are learning that the gains can be very important. Okay, if you see this graph basically have results from optimizing the budgets in the way that I just showed you we have done for Uganda, but we have done it for 3 more countries. And if you can see here, with the same money, but repurposed differently, looking for those efficiency areas that Christian mentioned at the beginning, you start talking about, getting more than 1 million people out of poverty. You start talking about thousands of jobs being created, millions of people being able to afford a healthy diet all of a sudden, and then of course, agri-food GDP growth that is higher. Okay, so there is a lot of potential gains to be made in agriculture if you use your budgets smartly. Now, the problem here is that this and we have deliberately put it that way, ignores climate change, right? So potentially there is a lot of things to be had, but when you bring the big elephant in the room into this analysis, you start seeing that it's not as easy as it looks, right? So I will show you then what happens when you start integrating climate into these things, into public expenditure monitoring and tracking, into the modeling. Things start changing. The requirements are much larger. You have to work hard with partners and governments to really, make good headway in understanding how to invest better in agriculture. And here, let me move on and tell you what is the complexity. And I hope that our panelists can help us understand this from a more pragmatic perspective in their countries. So here, for instance, analyzing and optimizing public budgets with a climate lens, what we learn is that it's very complex and challenging. And there are two reasons for that. In the case of public expenditures, the issue is that there is a huge ambiguity in terms of how public expenditures can, help us adapt. They can actually mess things up, actually. So in some areas we are sure public expenditures are good. In some others, we are not so sure. We need to learn more. So here on the right-hand side, I just pick up from the previous graph on the disaggregation for the public expenditure analysis. And you have the blue ones are things where we say, okay, we're kind of certain that spending more of those things could help us adapt and somehow mitigate. But in the purple ones, we are not sure. So for instance, if you invest in irrigation, R&D, and in extension, we know that generally you can help adaptation. But if you, for example, invest in fertilizers, we know that it may be good for adaptation depending on the moisture levels, for example. So there's a variable that comes in. And it could also be good for mitigation, but it depends because we know that they could produce emissions, right? But they can also increase productivity, thus sparing land that is not going to be used so that we can reduce emissions. So we don't know. So there is a lot to be done there. And the sector matters as well. So if you promote livestock, people would say, oh, generally this is not good because it will generate emissions. But what if the government invests in some sustainable feed for livestock? So there are so many things that can be added up that make us think that it's not easy. But we need to tackle this issue of understanding the effectiveness of public expenditures for climate change adaptation and mitigation. Now, the second one is on the optimization of the budgets. So here is complex. Why? Because optimization means compromising to change the budget, right? But generally, it's not that easy. Generally, it's not that easy. In practice, it is very difficult to reallocate a budget over the years. It doesn't take place shortly. It takes time. And most of the spending can only be gradually shifted around, assuming that there are no issues. Because if a country is looking into fiscal consolidation, then, it's going to be very tough to talk about budget changes. If, for example, there is reliance on unpredictable donor spending, it's difficult to really plan for budget reallocations. And there could be surprises, like the COVID-19, the war in Ukraine, rising prices, energy rising prices. So it's complex, so it's not easy. There could be political economy at play. Some countries find it very easy, simple, and politically appealing to use subsidies. And they are easy to introduce. But then you realize that you don't need those subsidies, but you can use the money for something else. It's not easy to get out of those subsidies. So it's not easy to do what we are trying to do here. And there are other issues that we have that make it believe that it's not easy. But we really need new tools. We really need new tools like the public expenditure tracking, like the modeling that take into account climate. And this is key to generate the evidence that will eventually, help us have the political will. So, just a couple of more slides, and then we can go into the panel discussion, Lauren. Here I am showing some of the things that can be done in public expenditure analysis, for example. One thing that can be done is that we can, add markers to the public expenditure. Meaning, you expand the methodology to start marking public expenditures for different reasons. So a marker, for example, could be that help us align the public expenditure data with national adaptation plans and climate relevant commitments. Imagine if you have that database with markers that show to you this expenditure is helping national adaptation plan, this one is not. So that is very important to track the implementation and the progress of these commitments that countries have done. A second one would be precisely when you really empirically tackle head-on the association between public expenditures, right, and adaptation and mitigation. So if you manage to mark your expenditures for those lines that could help you adapt and those that couldn't, and those lines that could help you mitigate and those that couldn't, then you have a really interesting starting point. Because markers can be really, really critical to find ways of making the budget climate smarter, right? For example, if a marker shows that a low and decreasing effectiveness of extension expenditures is out there, then the government can take this information and find ways to make extension services more resilient to climate change. For example, by focusing less and less on the traditional curriculum and focusing more on adopting climate-smart technologies and practices. Also, you can trace projects, and this is actually more refined. Here, you do a deep dive to add markers that identify the main public projects and activities with the highest potential to meet climate-related goals. And once you identify those projects and activities, then you can improve their design and implementation to ensure that they have more mitigation and adaptation potential. Last but not least, on modeling. And here I come back to what I showed. Remember the table that I showed with a few countries' results. Now I'm picking up only two for the sake of simplicity for Uganda. As I showed to you, optimizing budgets alone without thinking about climate would give you very important gains. And I showed you already many of them. I picked up two of them. In Uganda, for example, the number of people that could be lifted out of poverty and how much annual food GDP would increase if you optimize your budget. Now, let's take the business as usual, forget about optimizing, and just bring a scenario where you assume that there is rising temperatures by 0.6 degrees, which is very, very modest. Okay, there are some scenarios that point to more than that. If you bring that scenario, what happens is that these rising temperatures affect your productivity in agriculture. And if you affect your productivity in agriculture, basically means that the effectiveness with which your public expenditures will bring productivity gains diminishes. So rising temperatures will affect your productivity and the effectiveness of the budget. And that's very important to keep in mind if we want to talk about smarter budgets in agriculture. So here, for instance, if you bring a simulation where you bring that up, then actually you see that there are losses, honestly. More than 500,000 people would be in poverty now, if you take into account rising temperatures. Then you don't have GDP growth, you have agri-food GDP decreases, right? Because you have these expenditures is less effective. Now, in this scenario, I'm not optimizing anything. But if I optimize the budget, even if climate change is hitting me, I start seeing very interesting things like I start offsetting the impact of rising temperatures, right? So now you have not how many people being, getting into poverty because of the rising temperatures, but you have only 100,000. It's a big number, but it's much less than you have. And you have a GDP decrease, which is much, much smaller. So it means that optimization is very important, even if you have climate change, and that we need these tools to do that. But it's not only about optimizing what we have, we need more. Here we are learning that public budgets are not large, and as I said at the beginning. So we started doing simulations, how much more you need to start really offsetting. And initially we reached to a point where if you increase your budget in Uganda by 20% and you allocate it optimally, you manage to fully offset. You don't see it maybe because the couch is covering that, but it's 0% change in GDP, meaning you fully offset the losses in GDP, and you only have 74 people getting into poverty. So it's not only about optimization, but also about scaling up smartly. So in conclusion, here let me share some points. The tools required to support adequate and effective public reallocation in countries in Africa are often missing, particularly if we bring climate change. This is the time to start innovating and retooling. It is challenging to adequately integrate climate adaptation and mitigation into annual budget processes. It is very challenging. As I said, there may be a budget inertia that we need to really confront. But no doubt climate change is affecting the effectiveness with which budgets affect agricultural transformation. So we need to retool. We need to retool our public expenditure, tracking and monitoring. We need to retool our optimization of budgets to modeling. and we need to work with governments to achieve that. Now, when I see this, of course, I walk out of this presentation with two questions here. Do governments and stakeholders in Africa need these tools to guide their climate-smart investments in agriculture? That's a question I have myself. We can innovate, but we need to know if there is, a demand for these things. And what are governments in Africa doing to make their budgets in agriculture climate-smarter? I'm sure that we will learn about answers to these questions through our discussion later today. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Marco, for that really enlightening presentation, which is hopeful somehow, but also gives a moment of pause when you see that even if we do our best and increase budgets by 20%, we still have zero growth, which also is a call for action to do even more than that, which is already a significant amount of money. Very clear. Thank you so much. Now, I have the pleasure of introducing four fantastic panelists to all of you, and then I'm going to join them on that side of the stage, but allow me to sort of read out their profiles and then ask them to come up to the stage, and then we'll have a conversation with them. So our first panelist is Dr. Fawzi Benfoui, who is the director of the National Institute of Agroeconomic Research in Morocco. And he is also the scientific director of the Adaptation of African Agricultural Initiatives. He has a number of different roles, including being the president of the Scientific Council of the Moroccan Foundation for Advanced Science, Innovation and Research. He's also a member of the Board of Trustees of ICARD. He's held a number of previous roles, including the director of the School of Agriculture and the coordinator of the Agrobioscience Research Program at the University Mohammed VI Polytechnic of Ben Guzeyr. And he also worked as the executive director of the National Research Council of Canada in the flagship Wheat Improvement Program between 2012 and 2017. He has co-authored more than 40 scientific articles in agriculture, DNA, diagnostics, molecular biology, genomics, and plant physiology. And he's the inventor of 3 US patents in molecular diagnostics. Fawzi, can I ask you to join us on the stage? Thank you very much for being here. I meant to mention also that he has a doctorate in plant physiology from the University of Sorbonne. Alan Medicine is our second panelist. Alan is a senior program manager at the agricultural development team at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And his work focuses on the development and application of analytical tools for informing the prioritization of government policies and public investments, which target outcomes related to inclusive agricultural transformation. He oversees a large portfolio which works on policy prioritization, including the one you've just heard about from the FAO, the Regional Network of Agricultural Policy Institutes, the International Food Policy Research Institute, or IFPRI, the Bureau for Food and Agricultural Policy, and the World Bank. And prior to joining the foundation, he worked for Cambridge Economic Policy Associates, as well as other institutions, and has a master's degree in development economics from the University of Oxford. Alan, please come up to the stage. Third, we have Kingsley Kwako Amoako, who works with the Directorate of Crop Services at the Ministry of Food and Agriculture in Ghana. He has 34 years work experience with Ghana's Ministry of Food and Agriculture, and the majority of his professional work has been in the area of sustainable land management, environmental sustainability, and in the past 15 years he's been working on climate change. Kingsley has also been the head of the Environment, Climate Change and Land Management Unit since 2016, which coordinates climate change issues for all of Ghana's agricultural sector. Kingsley, please come up to the stage. And finally, last but not least, we have Rachel Jambo. Rachel is the team lead for Uganda for the Kilimo Trust in Uganda, and she is a social economist with over 11 years of experience in value chain institutions and support services. She's passionate about nurturing national and regional agricultural trade-based systems and mentoring agribusinesses. She joined Kilimo Trust in 2010 and has been providing technical and administrative leadership for various projects that has been implemented by the Trust. And she has a Master's in Agribusiness Management and a Bachelor of Science in Forestry from Makerere University. Rachel, please come to the stage. Can you help me welcome them all, please? AI that could move me over the stage more quickly, but nonetheless, here I am. So colleagues, you've heard the presentation from Marco, and you've heard the introduction and the sort of setting the stage that Christian was available to provide to us. And I have a number of questions that I wanted to ask you. I think I'll start with Fawzi, actually. Fawzi, we're really happy to have you here to sort of give us some insights from your work in Morocco. I think it's important to hear the experience of countries. So maybe you can tell us a little bit about how your institute's research findings on climate-smart solutions for agriculture have been informing policy decisions or budgetary allocations in Morocco, or the strategies about those.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to participate in this panel. First of all, I will give some context of agriculture in Morocco, and then talk about how climate change has affected agricultural productivity and some of the potential solutions, how research has helped the government in making some decisions, and finally giving a specific example how the government is funding some of these activities. First of all, in relation to agriculture in Morocco, it plays an important role with 15% contribution to the GDP, and there are about 40% of the population that are involved in agriculture. One of the main crops or area of agriculture are cereals. Cereals occupy about 4 million hectares of the 9 million hectares of agriculture area in Morocco, and people in Morocco do eat a lot of bread and couscous, so that's an important thing. Now, how climate has affected agriculture? If we look at the last 100 years and we divide that into the first 50 years, the frequency of drought was about, let's say, less than 10 drought. We call it a drought year when there is 250 millimeters rainfall. In the last 50 years, that frequency has multiplied by 2. And when there is a year of drought, and in particular in the cereal area, which is rain-fed, it's mostly not irrigated, the productivity is affected very much. And I'll give an example of 2 years, 2021 and 2022. In 2021, it was average rainfall. Morocco produced approximately 10 million tons of cereals. That's red wheat, durum wheat, and barley. The following year was a drought year, and the productivity went from 10 million tons to 3 million tons, a reduction of 70%. So then Morocco has to resort to importing wheat. Now, how did research contribute or is contributing to solutions? Well, first of all, we can, by addressing the effect of climate change, which is low rainfall, we can act or work on 3 areas. We can look at the soil, managing water, or addressing the issue of biodiversity, and they are interrelated. But I will focus on one example because of time, and that's the one on soil. Most of the Moroccan agriculture in the 4 million hectare area, people use conventional tilling. And research has demonstrated in other countries and in Iran, my institution, in the last 30 years, that when we do a no-till, so we don't do conventional tilling, so we don't turn the soil, we just deposit the seed on the surface of the ground, basically we could have many benefits. There's less emission of CO2 because we're not returning the soil, less evaporation, we preserve the water in the soil. We don't use as much fuel because we go only one way, one pass with a tractor instead of 2. So we save liaison. There's less erosion. When you till and the wind comes in or there's a heavy rainfall, we lose a lot of soil. But most importantly, more yield to the farmer. And the small farmers can make more benefit. On average, in 30 years of experience, we can find that the no-till system can provide 30% more yield compared to the conventional tilling. And in a year of drought, it could go 100% more. Now, the third point is how the government is addressing this. The Moroccan government has developed a strategy called Generation Green Strategy between 2020 and 2030. So it's a 10-year strategy where asked in our institution to develop a roadmap to implement in the no-till. So there is, in that strategy, an objective of doing 1 million hectare over the 10 period time of no-till and transforming and changing the system. What is required? The main thing that's required is special equipment or seeders, because it's not the same system, and there is investment that's required, and that's when we come to the government input in this strategy. So the Morocco or the Minister of Agriculture provide 50% finance. So for somebody who wants to buy a seeder, so basically the government contributes 50%. An average cost of seeders that are manufactured in Morocco cost about $10,000 US. The other thing that for small farmers who don't have money to buy a seeder, the Moroccan government or the Ministry of Agriculture is purchasing seeders and providing to cooperative. Last year, 70 seeders were provided. This year, the government is going to provide 130 seeders. We estimated that over the 10-period span, we would require 3,000 seeders, and we have approximately now 500. So that shows some of the example, and of course, there is a significant input that's required in training, because the no-till system is not just the seeders, it's a whole system. We have to do crop rotations, we have to leave some of the organic matter in the soil in order to be successful. So that gives you an idea of what is Morocco doing in addressing the effect of climate change and mitigating or adapting to low rainfall and using the no-till system. Thank you.
Thank you. That's super interesting. I think it's a very comprehensive and clear example of how you translate from a very severe drought impact to technology and then translating it into the specific investments that are needed in training and in machinery. Kingsley, let me come to you next to hear a little bit about the perspective from Ghana now that we've heard about Morocco. Can you tell us first how climate change is influencing public investment decisions in Ghana and the Ministry of Agriculture? And then maybe tell us a little bit about, you heard about the tools that MAPCOP has, you're familiar with the program. How do you think that these kinds of tools could help support decision-making around climate adaptation in Ghana?
Thank you very much for the question, and thanks for the presentation. It's an eye-opener to some of us. Let me also give a little bit background about Ghana's agriculture. It's quite complex in Ghana because we have 6 agroecological zones. From the savanna to the savanna, forest savanna transition, to the forest and to the rainforest. So you can imagine what kind of landscape, agricultural landscape that we are dealing with. But in the area of climate impacts, we've been experiencing increases in temperature rise. It's on record that over the last 30 years, on average, Ghana has recorded 1 degree Celsius increase across the country. It means that some places are higher, whilst other places are lower. Rainfall is becoming erratic. It's becoming difficult to predict when it will start because there's shifts on the onset of the rains, and then cessation has also changed. So it's becoming challenging. And then, in addition to this, we're having flash floods, and then sometimes longer than expected dry spells. So it's a mix of things. First, flash floods are happening in the forest areas, the northern areas, which is the savanna, is experiencing longer than expected dry spells. So these have been the challenges that Ghana has been confronted with over the last 10-15 years. And what government has started doing since 2017 is to support smallholder farmers. And before I get there, Ghana's agriculture sector is dominated by the smallholders, averaging less than 2 hectares of land. And the population is over 60-70% that are into agriculture. So you can imagine the enormity of the challenge that we have to deal with. So government brought on board since 2017 what it has termed Planting for Food and Jobs, where it's supported smallholder farmers to acquire climate responsive seed systems and also subsidized the seeds, started with 50% and gradually reducing the subsidies so farmers could access improved seeds that are climate responsive as well, and also increase the use of fertilizer by subsidizing the fertilizers, also around 50% and gradually reducing it over the last few years. Besides this, looking at the presentation, even though the ministry is responsible for food and agriculture, the government in its own wisdom also brought aboard the school feeding program to ensure that school children get good and healthy diets, so that we could link the subsidy program with the school feeding as well. And then the school feeding program is sitting in a different place, but we have some linkages. So food productivity shot up and then made available food in the market. In addition to these ones, water in the northern Savannah zone, which is the Savannah area closer to Burkina Faso, was very critical. That's where we also have a majority of our livestock population. So government introduced the One Village, One Dam initiative to harvest rainwater and make them available for livestock watering, especially during the long dry season. In that area, we are talking about 7 months dry period. So you can imagine livestock go through hell, so water, trying to make water available. It also, as part of the initiative, try to provide warehousing across the country, where at least each district was supposed to have one warehouse where productivity increases. There should be a place to store them. Government also increased budgetary allocation for rehabilitation of irrigation schemes and providing additional ones, whilst supporting the private sector to also bring upon irrigation, especially in the northern Savannah zone, to support dry season agriculture as well. So this is what government has been doing over the last few years until this year. President, I think about a week ago, when government has analyzed the interventions and has revised the planting for food and jobs, and is gradually shifting from the subsidy program to input credits. It's also because of our fiscal consolidation challenges that we have in the country as of now. Now, responding to the second question, whether it is relevant for us to use the tools, I would say yes. All this while, the scientific basis for some of these things needs to be strengthened. And when we're talking about budgetary allocations, we are dealing with economists, not agriculturists. And therefore, we need to bring on board these tools for them to appreciate the impact of climate change in our agriculture and agri-food systems, so that when we're asking for public increase in public investment in agriculture, linking it to climate change, then it will be clearer to them, so that they will understand why we need to allocate more resources to get the desired impact. So I will go for it. I think that is very important for our budget and the purpose of our public budget. Thank you.
Thank you, Kingsley. Sounds like a broad array of challenges, but quite a comprehensive response from the government. And I appreciate what you said about having the tools to make sure that the Ministry of Agriculture can make an argument to the Minister of Economics as well. It's obviously very important. Thank you so much. Alan, I wanted to ask you a question. I think we see, of course, the challenges that the countries are facing from these examples and from the examples that we heard before. We know that climate change is a major issue that agricultural transformation needs to take into consideration. And I wondered if you could tell us a little bit about how climate change has come to be central and at the forefront of the Bill and Melinda Gates agricultural transformation portfolio, and a little bit about what the objectives of the program are, where it's headed, and how it relates to the conversation we're having here. Thanks.
Sure, thanks, Lauren, and thank you, Mark and Christian, for your remarks and the great presentation, and for inviting me to be on this panel. So yes, the Gates Foundation absolutely recognises the two maps that Marco put on the screen that suggest that smallholder farmers in Africa are really exposed to climate risk and are the least prepared to deal with that. And so we have made a big shift in our own strategy in the last few years to really focus down on climate adaptation. So what are the actions that governments, the private sector, farmers and others need to take to that climate reality. And so the agriculture team at the Gates Foundation invests in drought-tolerant, insect-resistant crop varieties, animal health products that help livestock sort of be more resilient to outbreaks of pests and diseases. We invest in the early warning system, African leadership voice in the climate dialogue at the continental and international level, digital technologies for improving the delivery of agronomic advice to farmers, and the likes of the MAFAP programme. So that presentation that Marco gave earlier is a real flavour of what we support, and that is improved analytics that help governments to identify the policy and public investment priorities in order to deliver big policy objectives on poverty, and on employment, and on rural economic growth, on diets, on food security, on women's empowerment, all within this reality of increased frequency of extreme weather events and the longer term climate change trajectory that will see temperatures increase, increased precipitation and so on. And the reality is, as we saw earlier, that climate impacts all of these variables, the uncertainty around them, and just to offset the effect of that reduced productivity arising from increased temperatures, say, there's big new public investments required, but there's also a need to repurpose the existing budget. And there's actually quite a lot, as Marco was highlighting, that the models suggest can be done just from a reallocation of the existing budget. And that kind of diversifying of spend and the diversifying of commodity choice, be that crops or livestock, the models can help articulate some of the trade-offs, the cost and benefits associated with these alternatives in terms of repurposed budgets, different value chain choices, and so on. And I think a key feature that I think Kingsley has alluded to just now is the analytics try to speak the language of the Ministry of Finance, not just the people who already believe in that narrative, the Ministry of Agriculture, the Ministry of Environment, but talk to that language of poverty and jobs and growth and these big outcomes that governments are making big promises around. How does climate impact those? What does it mean for agriculture as the key vehicle to deliver these huge policy objectives? And therefore, how does one potentially reallocate the budget to more than offset the impacts of climate? So that's what we're doing as the Gates Foundation, and how we are delivering these better analytics with partners like with FAO, but actually with other partners as well. It's an effort across an ecosystem of analytics and policy partners that engage with governments. It's not just FAO that governments engage with, of course, and we want to see that ecosystem of partners become smarter in terms of modelling and other analysis of the climate problem.
Thanks, Alan. That was very clear. I guess as FAO, I also have to say we're happy that you engage with others, but we're happy also that you mentioned that you also have to engage with others, not just FAO. I'm totally kidding. Thank you so much, Alan. Rachel, you work with a wide variety of stakeholders in your trust, and I wondered if you could tell us about two things. Right, the first is how climate change is affecting those stakeholders, and secondly, how public investments in agriculture can improve the well-being of those stakeholders, and how the partnership with government should evolve. Over to you.
Thanks, Laura, and thanks my fellow panelists for that. In Limo Trust, we work on value chain development across the East African region, not just in Uganda where we are based as the headquarters. I also work in Tanzania as well. We work in Rwanda, we work in Kenya, and we are developing these market systems and food systems around different value chains, depending on what the need is. And we just completed, and I was leading that initiative, about developing a digital climate adaptation profile for Tanzania. And we were funded by the Global Climate Adaptation Center. And I would like to share those insights. What are actors doing on their own? How is climate change impacting on them? If I go back to the smallholder farmers that we work with directly and SMEs around which we are trying to build supply chains that are relevant but also profitable for smallholder farmers as well. One of the things that we have noticed, and this is common, I was just listening to Kingsley and I was like, Ghana may as well be in Uganda or Tanzania or somewhere else around. So we are experiencing these impacts almost at the same level. One of the things that is happening is that because of the unpredictableness of rains, smallholder farmers are moving away from perennial crop production and moving into shorter term annual crops, where they know that if they do an investment, maybe another thing that I need to mention before I move into the investment is that the smallholder farmers that we have, that we work with directly, are the largest private sector that we work with. Why? Because the agriculture sector employs more than 80%. The agriculture sector provides more than 80% of the jobs that we have in our countries. And so the private sector that we look at, which is the largest, are the smallholder farmers. Because they wake up every day, make decisions on what are they going to grow, with what resources can they access, and where can they sell their produce. So because of climate change, we are seeing them moving slowly but surely away from perennials into shorter term crops. So this is a finding that is brand new. We just did the adaptation profile. That's one thing they are doing. It's a coping mechanism, and it is something that they are rationally doing because they don't want to lose their investments. That's one thing. The other thing that they're doing is adopting more of the climate smart or climate tolerant varieties and crops. So they're moving away from crops like banana, they're moving away from crops like coffee and tea and things like this that require a lot of rainfall, and moving into more climate resilient value chains like oil crops, oilseed crops, cassava, sorghum. These are the value chains that are making the most sense to smallholder farmers. The other thing that they are doing is they are, for pastoralists in their pastoral areas, they are actually reducing stocks of animals. I was listening to Kingsley saying, animals go through hell. How can livestock survive for 7 months without water? They'll just die. Plain and simple. And yet these pastoralists depend on these livestock as their livelihood. They don't have any other. And so if the livelihood is slowly but surely dying off, they're just destocking. And doing other things like, for pastoralists especially, they are also moving into rainwater harvesting strategies, building those small dams. If the government is not doing it, those local people are actually doing it, digging those dams so that there is water for the animals. The other thing that they are doing is actually migration. We are seeing a lot of migration from rural areas into urban areas and creating a social group called the urban poor. Now that is a story for another day. We can't talk about the urban poor and what is happening, but it's because people are no longer seeing livelihoods in the rural areas, and therefore they're moving into the urban areas, seeking for job opportunities, seeking for livelihoods in the urban areas, and creating all the other social issues that go with that. They are also seeking more information. We are actually seeing farmers demanding information, either by the mobile phone or going to the extension service providers. Those days, farmers used not to ask for information. Things like weather information was never something that was really important. Why? The rainy seasons were predictable. But these days, they are not predictable. Let me tell you a life story of right now. This is September. In Uganda, we were already supposed to be almost in the middle of the rainy season. We haven't seen rains at all. We don't know whether they're coming or not. So about 2 days ago, the Ministry of Environment now announced that the rains are coming, but they're going to be so destructive that we have all been informed in advance to prepare. People in the Ministry of Works have been told bridges are going to be washed away. People in the mountainous areas have been told to please shift because we do have mudslides in Uganda. People who are managing hospitals have been already told to prepare for cholera cases, diarrhea, malaria, and all these things. And so we have those extremes, that the rains are not coming when they're supposed to come, and when they come, they're very destructive to livelihoods. So this is what is happening. And SMEs, of course, are also seeking to make their supply chains more reliable. And therefore, they are going more into contract farming. So we are seeing even local SMEs that were not previously minding about contract farming, seeking more and more opportunities. They come to us, you people, I'm seeking for farmers who can go into contract with me so that they can supply me, so that I can supply my own markets. So this is what is happening in terms of the first question. What does it mean for governments to invest in climate resilient strategies or initiatives such as irrigation, rehabilitation of degraded lands, rehabilitation of wetlands, and also afforestation programs? Because these are the things that we are increasingly seeing governments wanting to put money into, including the government of Uganda. They are actually, they put a policy out to now slowly but surely reduce smallholder activity in wetlands. This is now a policy. We have a lot of people in the wetlands growing all kinds of foodstuffs, but the government is saying we need to get out of wetlands. The other thing that they've done is to stop export of timber from Uganda. Right now, forestry investors are not allowed to export timber out of Uganda. And this is something that the government now is trying to do to prevent further degradation of forest lands and also of wetlands. But investments such as these means several things. One is de-risking agriculture. Right now, agriculture is seen by all financiers to be very, very risky. Let aside the COVID pandemic that did a number on the agriculture sector. Right now, most financing institutions don't want to lend to agriculture. It is too risky. So investments that would help to make agriculture more resilient to climate change definitely de-risk agricultural sector lending. That's one of the things. Number two is enhanced job creation. More than 60% of our populations, Uganda is now at 48 million people. 60% of those people are below the age of 35. They're educated, they're tech savvy, they're looking for jobs. Those jobs are nowhere to be found. So when I saw Dr. Sanchez looking at Uganda, that if we make the budget smarter, if we have the ability to add an extra 200,000 jobs, 250,000 jobs, to the current 400,000 that we can, that we are all, the whole GDP of Uganda can only produce 400,000 jobs right now on an annual basis. But it is far less than the millions of young people that are coming out of universities. And therefore, if we make agriculture more resilient, we can attract the young people to see these opportunities. We are trying to do that as an institution, as a civil society institution, where we are attracting the youth into agriculture, and they are asking us one question. My father has a plantation. He's slashing it down, plantation of coffee, plantation of banana. He used that plantation to pay for my school fees. Why do you want me to go into agriculture? Yet I can see even my parents are no longer looking at it as profitable. So it is a question to all of us. in this room. And for those that are funding, like the Gates Foundation, thank you very much. Finally, jumping on board and accepting that we have an issue of climate change. So, any funding that goes into enabling the governments to make those critical investments will also help us who are working with these young people to be able to answer those questions, because right now we don't have answers. And these are people who talk to us. We talk to them every day, we go to the communities, we are dealing with them every day, and they're asking these questions, and no one has these answers. So job creation will be very, very critical. The other one is empowering local communities to build the rural economies. I grew up where the rural economies were very strong. Why? They were selling coffee, they were selling bananas, through the produce cooperatives, and people did not need to move into cities. So any investments, either government, society, or donors are making into making agriculture more resilient, is enabling the rural communities to build that rural economy, to rebuild it. Because we have seen it actually decimating slowly but surely over the years. There are no longer opportunities in the rural areas. Why? People depend on the factor of production of land. If the land is no longer productive, people don't have any other factor of production. So that would be something that needs to be worked on, empowering local communities to rebuild the rural economies so that we stop rural-urban migration. Last but not least, okay, that was the point, reduction in rural-urban migration, to make sure that we keep people in rural areas, get our young people to like agriculture, to find it sexy enough that somebody is educated, they can use a mobile phone, they know how to use a laptop, they can access information via the internet and apply the information that we have. There's an explosion of knowledge, that those new knowledge that is available can be applied in the rural areas and have people remain there and build their lives in the rural areas. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Rachel. I think those were excellent points, and yeah, the situation sounds extremely complicated, but I was really hopeful about what you said about the creation of jobs. Because actually, and maybe this is something people will want to come back to, the climate smart agriculture and green jobs has the potential to create jobs, and so I'm not sure what the modeling shows about offsetting job losses or if it creates jobs, but that's an interesting angle given the growing youth population and the number of people who need to find jobs in this sector, because it is the main engine of growth, as you heard from all of the participants here, and the main engine of jobs, in fact. So we're just on time. We have plenty of time to take questions from the audience. I think that there's microphones that can circulate. We would love to hear your questions. I'll take around 2 or 3 of them and pass them back to the panelists. If you'd raise your hand if you have a question you'd like to pose. There's a gentleman in the back. Thank you.
Yes, my name is Jenny Franco. I work for an organization called Unicorto. We are also the stakeholders or the active members on promoting climate adaptation and building resilience of small-scale farmers. I would like to share a little bit of a problem that we're managing. We are actually into bringing in the perspective of the private sector, becoming responsible investors or funding, providing loans to small-scale farmers towards promoting sustainable practices. So we are currently managing a project where we're doing the promoting sustainable rice production, and we want to integrate the perspectives of responsible financing from the private actors, the private financial institutions. We are about to pilot an innovative climate smart agriculture product with one of the financial institutions, and we will be happy to discuss more about this journey with different actors in the perspectives of increasing investment towards climate mitigation and adaptation.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I saw a hand back there first. I'll come to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much for this opportunity. My name is Philip Mbutu, the CEO and Director of Mbutu Solution Company Limited from Morogoro, Tanzania, but we offer services and products countrywide. I'd love to ask you one question. How can you help or support the SMEs to help youth, women, and farmers by climate smart entrepreneurship projects and programs? For example, currently I'm looking for partners, supporters in implementing something called the Smart Entrepreneurship Innovation Center, where we can coach, we can mentor, and we can demonstrate innovations and technologies of smart agriculture for contributing to sustainable development goals, while is supporting youth, women, and farmers as well. But yeah, thank you. So how are we going to be part of beneficiaries in this context? Thank you.
Thank you so much. Just pass my microphone to you.
Okay, thank you very much. My name is Octavian Laswai, Irrigation and Water Resource Engineer from Holy Grain Agri Group Limited. Thank you for this presentation. And we know that climate change is alarming to the food system, the food security, and is strengthening the African continent and the Horn of Africa. So I just want to ask, there's many solutions that trigger to provide this climate change or climate smart agriculture, such as rainwater harvesting, drip irrigation, greenhouses, policies, and so many products that there seems to be a solution to this. So I just want to ask you to understand, what are the priorities? We have many solutions around, but for your context, what technologies are priority for you, or what are the technologies that you have already proved it to be the real solution towards this, as we are focused on financing, so that the financiers, the service providers like I can understand really this is the solution that we need to focus on when we are dealing with climate change or climate smart agriculture. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, so we have three questions, and let me see if I can direct them towards the panelists, but if others want to come in, of course, I welcome that too. I think the first question was about how we can encourage the private sector to make sustainable investments. And I'm sure that you can comment from the standpoint of governments, donors, even from civil society. What kinds of tools do we have? How can we encourage sustainable investments in agriculture from the private sector? Maybe I could start with you, Kingsley.
Well, thank you very much. From where I sit as public sector worker, as a practitioner dealing with smallholder farmers, also policy, I see that we have a lot of indigenous technologies, indigenous dimensions that we are gradually losing, and that is making sustainable investments and practices very challenging to our smallholder farmers. So I would want to say that before we bring in any new technology, we need to look at what we have in our communities. How has it worked? Is it able to withstand the current trends? Why do we need to amend so that we can grow with it to make it sustainable? Because the people there already know these technologies, they know these systems, and they've been using it for quite some time now, and therefore adapting it becomes easier than bringing bring a whole new system or technology to come and put us together. So that is one key thing that we need to look at. Of course, we also need to blend it with research so that we can move the process forward. Practically, our communities, our smallholder farmers, and even the SMEs are ready to invest in sustainable investment practices. Therefore, whilst government is trying to put up policies, policies it's a high level, it's general, but we need to downscale it to the various sectors and various ecologies and landscapes for it to be meaningful to whoever is going to apply or implement that policy. So generally this is what I would say, and how to make it smarter, especially my brother who talked about women and youth. Women are very, very industrious. We only need to bring them up to speed and also try to understand where they are coming from so that we can align whatever we are trying to bring on board with what they already know, and then it will move them very fast. So let me pause here and give others the opportunity to also contribute.
Rachel, do you want to comment on that question about incentivizing the private sector to invest sustainably from some of the research you were describing?
Thank you, Laura. Thank you for the question on how to incentivize private sector. At the end of the day, whatever it is we promote has to make sense on the bottom line, because every business is in business to make profit, and therefore, yes, it might cost a bit more, but we need to have developed those business cases that show where is the private sector going to benefit. How is this cost? Because whatever it is we are pushing, or whatever it is we are encouraging private sector, or even the value chain actors to adopt, is going to cost money. Someone has to pay for it. It's either a donor paying, or a government paying, or the private companies themselves paying. And so, for me, what has worked is we must have those business models that make sense to the private sector, whatever the case may be, whether we're talking about climate change, whether we're talking about access to finance, whether we're talking about them providing extension services to smallholder farmers, whether we're talking about supply chain management, it must be able to make businesses. And so for us, what we do is we invest time in doing this diagnosis and say, you people, we have this problem that if you don't work with the smallholder farmers like this is the way it's going to affect your bottom line. But if you do an investment, and we usually, when we go to people like Bill Gates, we'll come to USAID, we'll come to GCA, and we will tell you that there is this issue that needs to be developed or addressed in the communities, but the private sector cannot take the whole cost. Somebody needs to do a bit of co-funding somewhere. We have found that private sector companies are actually willing to do the investment. They just need a little bit of help from somewhere. And so we develop these matching grants, they work on these communities, and things move very quickly, because once a farmer sees the buyer, this is the key to value chain development. Farmers will not invest if they don't know who is going to buy. They just don't. You will teach them, you will train them, you will bring them all these marvelous things, you will bring them these technologies, but for as long as they are not sure if the investment is going to pay, they just don't invest. If you're requesting them to buy a hybrid seed, it costs more than the normal seed, so they want to know who is going to offtake my products. And so we always think that it is better to work backwards. What do we want to achieve? This is the vision of success. We want to have technologies that are more climate resilient, that are more profitable for smallholder farmers and for the businesses. And then we say, okay, where are the leverage points? We look for those leverage points, look for the funding, who can bring this fund, who can contribute. Even smallholder farmers themselves are willing to contribute, just like Kingsley has said. And then the whole system moves forward. together. So this is what I can contribute about private sector investment. Thank you.
Thanks, Virginia. I like you brought it back to the de-risking idea as well, no? And then both of you answered that there was a sort of an unlocking. No? You mentioned unlocking the potential of women. You mentioned the unlocking through the de-risking. I think there's other questions coming, but maybe Alan, I want to give you the chance to answer the question maybe about women and youth and how they can contribute. And then I'll pass to you to ask a question about technologies. You gave us one very good example, but I think you can come up with others.
Thanks, Lauren, and thank you for the question. So yeah, to bring it back to climate smarter budgets and the application of some of the tools, notably the example that the MAFAP team presented earlier. So we can start to use these tools to understand where are the jobs coming from that the youth will need to go into. Which value chains is it? What are the public investments the government needs to make to realise the return on those value chains in terms of job creation for young people? We can actually glean quite a lot from the household survey data in terms of those impact pathways, if you like, towards those job opportunities. And also for women as well, so we can, there's utilisation of some of that household data that will inform where we think women's inclusion in the transformation process will occur, subject to the right investments. And it goes a bit to the question from the gentleman at the front here. Prioritization is absolutely crucial. The reality is that the national adaptation plans, some of the other climate plans that we see from the likes of the World Bank, the CCPRs and the Climate Smart Ag Investment plans, they all suffer from the same problem, which is they just list out too many actions for any government to take. Those plans won't be implemented. Why? Partly it's politics. The reality is they are unaffordable. There's just too much there's not enough money, there's too many activities to realise these outcomes that affect young people, that affect women, that affect the overall transformation of the economy. And so we are deliberately supporting the kinds of tools that help governments to prioritise. We don't have a list of what the priorities should be because it differs country to country. That's why we're offering essentially these neutral tools that allow governments to set their own objectives. It could be planting for food and jobs in Ghana. Okay, so prioritise employment creation and reduction in the prevalence of undernutrition as your targets. The models can calculate what the investments are to optimally hit those objectives. And it's also a spatial challenge as well, with spatial prioritisation, because it's not a generic answer for the whole country. Climate change could impact the north of the country different from the south, and so we need to get smarter about how we use spatial analytics, temporal analytics, when governments are really focused on the flash floods that are coming, the landslides, but they also have to invest in the longer-term resilience of their agriculture sector. That short-term, long-term balance is also very tricky, and these tools can inform that conversation as well. So there's a lot to digest, but that's why we're standing these tools up to inform those discussions inside of it.
Thanks, Pausi. The question about innovation, as a scientist, what would be some of the things that you recommend? You talked about the no-till system and seeds systems. Give us some other ideas, if you don't mind.
So definitely research and technology, and after that innovation technology can provide in terms of climate adaptation. And I will use the nexus soil, water, biodiversity to give some examples. For example, for managing soil health, all three play an important role in assuring and maintaining productivity or enhancing productivity and leading to food security. In terms of the soil, new technology can help us in terms of providing the right amount of inputs. We can use new technologies in the area of precision agriculture to analyze the soil and give the right amount of fertilizer or inputs. to maximize the productivity. Water. Here there are several opportunities in terms of managing water. And in the case of Morocco, water is becoming more scarce, and we need to manage it and use the less possible while maintaining the yield and the productivity. Some new technologies are, for example, the use of sensors, monitoring the humidity in the soil so that we can provide the water only when it's needed. Using some new type of irrigation, nano-irrigation. Here also we can save more water. As satellite imagery also can follow up on the evolution of a crop, and as depending on parameter called NDVR or the color of the plants, we can also provide water only when it's needed. And finally, on the crops, it was already mentioned, we have to focus more on more resilient crop and variety, and tap in the biodiversity that we have. As an example, in Morocco, we have an objective within the strategy I mentioned earlier. We're planting more of the carob tree, which is a tree of higher value, provide a higher value product while not requiring as much water. And we have a plan of planting 100,000 hectares of that. And then developing more resilient crop through genetic improvement. Recently, we, in collaboration with ICARDA and INRA, we have developed some varieties of wheat that require, that in a year of drought, compared to the older variety, can give 30% more yield than compared to the younger. So all these are examples of where the technology can help and in adaptation to climate change. Same time, these are opportunities to the private sector and to small investors or startup, and we can see in Morocco a lot of startup in the area of precision agriculture, whether it's in the use of drones or developing software that can help the farmers in managing in a better way their productivities. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think we're coming to a close, unless there's a burning question. Let's close. I think that this session has been fascinating, and I heard some themes coming up again and again. So the first is the need for prioritization. I mean, the number of challenges that you've heard about that climate change is presenting in situations where there's already large youth populations and problems of inclusion, scarce resources, fiscal constraints, as Kingsley mentioned, all around. I think prioritization is key. And that's one of the things that I think that the tools that we're looking at can really help governments to do is under situations of constraints. Where would it be best to channel public resources? That's the first one. The second one that came up again and again was about what kind of evidence do we need to argue with whom? Right? So there was two audiences that I heard. The first is, well, we have to convince ministries of finance and economics that we have things to invest in which are going to deliver returns and help meet objectives which are widely shared for governments. And the second is that we need convincing cases for businesses to invest because the bottom line matters. And so these two audiences, both of them need, robust data which make cases about the return on investment, whether it's public or private money in this case, right? And the third thing that I think we were getting around to is to think about how we make all of these policy choices and technological advancements, we put them in the hands of the people that need them the most, so that we make sure that smallholder farmers, young people, women, they see a future for using these technologies, for channeling public and private investment into a sector which we know will continue to drive economies in Africa and elsewhere, jobs on this continent and elsewhere for a long time. So I really appreciate your time and attention being here. I want to thank again Christian for helping us organize, Marco for your presentation, and the four panelists that I have here on stage. And if you could show them a sign of your appreciation by a round of applause, we'll close.